It's a real shift, I think, of federal defense policy for our country, focusing very clearly on our responsibilities to defend the continent, defend Canada, to defend Canada's Arctic sovereignty. This is exactly what Canada needs. It is new money. It is the money that is required to build the new capabilities that Canada and the armed forces require.
The Fed's today unveiling what they're calling their defense policy review. It's basically an update to the role they see for Canada's military and how they'll defend our country and secure our borders. It includes $8 billion in spending on defense over the next 5 years, which gets Canada to 1.76% of GDP by the end of the decade, closer to, but still short of NATO's target of 2%. Does that matter politically? Who better to answer than our front bench? Tonight with us, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Dan Moulton, he's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
I'll pilfer your strategic minds to begin with, and I'll start with you, Kathleen, on the timing of this. The review was announced with urgency back in 2022. It's 2 years later. We've been asking, where it is for a while. What do you think of the timing? So introducing this in the middle of a slew of other really significant budget announcements.
Sure, and not just that. If you are timing an announcement on the day that a once-in-a-century solar eclipse is going to happen.
But they knew it was coming. That's what is there purpose there? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, did they want it to get news? It's the question. You are kind of like the lead of the news tonight is going to be around the eclipse. And that's what people are talking about, the water cooler. They're not talking about the new defense spending, right? Hands down.
For me,
no,
yeah.
They are not, unfortunately. But that makes sense because that's not who the Liberals are targeting, right, with these budget announcements. We've talked about it before in your show, and we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, too, in terms of the millennials and others. But listen, it's not really a partisan issue. We've seen government after government after government introduce new defense plans and spending, but it seems no matter what, they can't seem to get the jets bought, the ships built, or the harassment ended. It just happens time and time again. And even with the announcements today and the significant money that they're putting on the table, it's questionable whether, considering how the Department of Defense has operated for so long, if they can actually spend the money and it not get wasted on some of the outsourcing and contracting and some of the outside suppliers, all those big names that we hear all the time, whether it's the Deloittes, the McKinseys, the Accentures, all those, or whether money will actually go to build the infrastructure that we so desperately need on our bases and to support the CAF, the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah, two quick things about that, Dan. From the last policy update, which came in 2017, I think there's $21 billion that has yet to be spent. At the same time, this is a substantial, if all the money does get out the door, it's substantial. It's triple what the spending was basically in 2015. What do you think about the way in which this rolled out and the timing of it? Because the people who planned this stuff, they knew the eclipse would be happening. They knew that they'd been primarily focused on housing and things of that nature. Was this sort of a get it done and move on type of thing?
No, I don't think they had to highlight it in this significant a way. I take Kathleen's point on the eclipse being today, but it's smack dab in the middle of a rather aggressive pre-budget rollout strategy that's targeted at speaking to younger voters across the country, particularly younger voters that are feeling a great deal of anxiety about a range of issues. And the government clearly has data to support the argument that younger voters are concerned about the state of global affairs. They're concerned about increasing hostility, the war in Ukraine, what's happening in Israel and Palestine. These are anxiety-creating issues for younger Canadians. And I think the government was trying to say, we're going to make a once-in-a-generation investment in updating, modernizing our military for the future, because we recognize we live in an increasingly unstable global environment, and we need to protect our trade routes, we need to protect our continent, and we need to invest in Arctic sovereignty. And so I think there is a clear political calculation here. I don't think they are trying to bury it. I think that this is something that could have been done in many, many different ways. The defense policy update didn't need to have an announcement from the Prime Minister in the middle of a budget rollout. It's there for a reason, because it's a significant investment in something that they clearly think is going to speak to a constituency of voters that they need to win back.
What's your view on that, Shakir?
I don't know. I don't think defense policy moves most significantly in any direction, right? I think ultimately this announcement, it's not really for our domestic audience. I think it's more for our international allies. We're not going to hit the 2%, great, but I think some folks in some of these Western capitals are at least smiling and saying, Canada's making some level of progress. I mean, we saw reports a few months ago where Prime Minister Trudeau was pretty forward with his NATO counterparts, right? Canada will never hit that 2% target. And this announcement is in line with that target. So with that statement, sorry. So I'm not surprised by this at all. It's good to see them pivot and focus on the Arctic a little bit, but let's be frank with each other. I think the Liberals have kind of lost a bit of credibility on defense issues and defense spending. And I think what I see here is more of a political positioning. This announcement, it allows them to kind of brush off some of the criticisms they'll get from the Conservatives or other critics. They can always point back to these talking points about them ramping up spending. I think Bill Blair something about doubling spending over the next, five or so years, procurement for certain equipment in the Arctic. So they'll have their political talking points, but I think this is not about getting any votes. It's about getting it out of the way, making sure our allies can have some level of comfort about ramping up spending, and again, shoring up an area that they're very weak in policy-wise, so that when they get criticisms, they can at least point to these talking points.
The issue of getting credit, or even on the issue of credibility, is interesting, Laura, because they have spent more, but it's against sort of an international context that Dan referred to, right, of great instability, including what's happening particularly in Ukraine, and the amount of money other countries in NATO have therefore increased their spending by, right? Like, relatively speaking, we're spending a lot more, but relative to them, we're really not. And therefore, it's like created this weird political quagmire for the federal government, which they're constantly getting questions about. Even though they are spending so much more, why aren't they spending more than that?
Well, I mean, clearly, the focus of the Trudeau government has not been on defense. That hasn't been their priority throughout their mandate. It's not what they're speaking to, and that's fine. That's not, I think, that the type of voters who they're trying to get back on side. This feels very much, though, as if the Trudeau government is trying to plug the holes before the budget and before the next election. Okay, where are we vulnerable? Where do we need to do more? Okay, obviously housing has been a big focus of the government's recent announcements, and defense has kind of been nagging at them. And they have been hearing it from journalists such as yourself, Vassy, time and time again, when they're going to meet that target, how they're going to respond to the shifting geopolitical landscape. They've obviously put time into this 20-year plan that they announced today. It is significant, and they're trying to look serious on an issue that, quite frankly, they have let slide for many years. Again, I don't think this is something that has been at the forefront of who the Liberal government is, of their brand. They're trying to make up, I think, for lost time. Maybe they're trying to speak to some of those younger people that Dan mentioned that are concerned about world events. But I think they're just trying to kind of look like they're back in control of some of these issues that they have really lost control of over the past few years and months.
Dan's facial reactions make me think that he wants to jump
Sorry,
in.
Dan.
Thank you, Vassy. I would love to. I mean, I think I do take I take a point here, which is that Liberals haven't prioritized defense spending and defense policy as one of the key planks of their communication strategy with the public over the last number of years. But I do take issue with the idea that they haven't invested in it. I mean, the Harper government allowed defense spending to fall below 1%, despite all of its macho talk on this topic. They were not putting money where their mouth was on this. And this government, the Trudeau government, has increased investment to the point we're now on a trajectory to hit that 2% spending of our GDP. That's an enormous investment in our military. Trudeau has spent more money than his predecessors in this area. And so I don't think the government gets enough credit. Do they take enough credit? That is an important debate. And I agree, they have not made it a core part of their communication strategy. But I don't feel like they get enough credit on this topic, frankly.
Yeah, that was sort of my point to Laura. It's like very interesting to me that they have spent so much more, but I think the reason they get less credit is because A, they don't make it a priority, like they don't communicate around it in the way that you're alluding to, but B, because of what happened in Ukraine, everyone else around us in NATO did more than even our idea of what more was. And so you have ambassadors coming on our shows being like, Canada needs to articulate a plan, which maybe 10 years ago they wouldn't have. So it's just like, I think, a change in context that have forced those kinds of questions. And anyway, I have more questions for the front bench, which I have to save for after a quick commercial. We're going to talk about the wider pre-budget